Bill doesn't know this, but he greatly influenced the writing of my book, and so I'm thankful that you came.
Oh, bless you, Donna.
Yeah, bless you too. He's going to speak on the history of the First Landing 1607 project.
Thank you, and thanks also to those who have already spoken. It's so inspiring. God bless you. Well, the most common form of government in world history is kings. From Nimrod on, the kingdoms kept getting bigger because with military advancements, kings can kill more people, and with technological advancements, they can track more people. The King of England became the most powerful king on the planet. He was a one-world government guy, a globalist. The sun never set on the British Empire. Wherever there's a king, it's a hierarchical system. If you're friends with the king, you're more equal. If you're not friends with the king, you're less equal. If you're an enemy of the king, you're dead. It's called treason, or you're a slave. People say, I thought slavery started in 1619. No, wherever you had the first king on top, you had slaves on the bottom, right? It's called fallen, selfish human nature. Anyway, after the Reformation, Calvinist Puritans began a movement to limit a king's power. And they were called Christian Hebraists. They look back to ancient Israel as the model, the first 400 years out of Egypt before King Saul, and where you had millions of people and no king. And it worked because every single citizen was taught the law, and they were personally accountable to God to follow the law. And so it's not easy to wrest power from a globalist king, but that's the story of America. And so a key point in this story is Virginia, so named by Sir Walter Raleigh after the Virgin Queen Elizabeth. Raleigh attempted the Roanoke colony in 1584, but when the Spanish Armada attacked England in 1588, supply ships could not return to the Roanoke colony. When they finally arrived in 1590, they found nobody there. It was called the Lost Colony. Sir Walter Raleigh personally lost 30,000 pounds sterling on his Roanoke endeavor, and that discouraged anybody else from attempting a colony. This changed a decade later with Richard Hakluyt, and he published descriptions of the New World, including a translation of Hernando de Soto's discoveries in Florida. So in 1602, Bartholomew Gosnold, am I talking too fast? All right. In 1602, Bartholomew Gosnold led the first expedition to the areas of Massachusetts and Maine. He gave Cape Cod its name, as well as Martha's Vineyard. Well, Bartholomew Gosnold invited friends, investors, to his home, Otley Hall, which still stands in the rolling countryside of Suffolk, England. It's considered one of England's top 20 historical houses. There at Otley Hall, around the fireplace, Bartholomew Gosnold and his investor friends conceived of an idea for the Virginia Company. And now, companies. There were few of them during the Middle Ages because it was a sin of usury to pay or receive interest. After the Reformation, joint stock companies came into existence. This was a novel idea because it limited liability, shared profits, and the collective weight of all the people in the company sort of gave a little pressure on the king when they were negotiating. Joint stock companies spurred investments in trade and colonization. And so it introduced a degree of autonomy from the king in their day-to-day operations. So the king controls everything, and he would give land to a proprietary colony to somebody, but the company colony, the king sort of gave them permission and let them run the thing on their own. So it was a step in breaking away from the power of the king. Companies were a win-win for the king. He risked nothing and got a percentage of what came in. King Edward VI authorized the Company of Adventure Merchants to New Lands in 1553. They were wanting to sail north of Russia to get to China, and they froze in the ice and died. Anyway, in 1600, the British East India Company was founded, and then 1602, the Dutch East India Company was founded. They added a novelty called a stock market. And then, so around the fireplace, 1606, the Virginia Company was formed. Investors were Bartholomew Gosnold, his cousin Edward Winfield, Richard Hakluyt, Baron Delaware, like Delaware, Sir Edwin Sandys. He was the chief opponent of the divine right of kings. And the king hated him so much that later he said, choose anyone you want to be treasurer of the Virginia Company, even the devil, but don't pick Edwin Sandys. Anyway, and many of them were investors in the East India Company, invested in the Virginia Company. So Bartholomew Gosnold approached King James on behalf of the Virginia Company and got a charter in 1606. And it says, greatly commending their desires for the furtherance of so noble a work, which may, by the providence of Almighty God, hereafter tend to the glory of his divine majesty in propagating of Christian religion to such people as yet live in darkness and miserable ignorance of the true knowledge and worship of God. That was the first charter. Gosnold recruited Captain John Smith. He was known for fighting the Ottoman Muslims in the long Turkish War over in Hungary. And he was captured, made a slave, and escaped to Russia. It's quite an interesting story. In 1606, 3 ships set sail from England with 105 settlers. Gosnold was captain of the Godspeed. Christopher Newport was captain of the Susan Constant, and John Ratcliffe was captain of the Discovery. After a 5-month journey, which included a stop in Puerto Rico, they entered Chesapeake Bay and made landfall right here on April 26th, 1607, at Cape Henry, named for Prince Henry of Wales. Upon disembarking, the settlers' first act was to erect a Christian cross. Their chaplain, Reverend Robert Hunt, offered the first prayer. They sailed up the James River, named after King James. They established Jamestown May 13th, 1607, the first permanent English settlement in the New World. Gosnold helped design Jamestown, but he died after only 4 months and buried outside the fort. Now, the first president or governor of the colony was Edward Winfield, succeeded by John Ratcliffe, captain of the Discovery ship, but he was captured by Chief Powhatan's warriors and tortured to death. It was pretty gruesome, but I won't explain it to you. Anyway, Matthew Scrivener was the next governor. He drowned in a storm crossing over to Hog Island. He was succeeded by Captain John Smith as the governor of Virginia. And Captain John Smith was captured by Chief Powhatan's men and almost killed when his young daughter Pocahontas interceded and kept his head from being smashed. George Percy was the next, and he was the governor during the starving time. In 1 year, it went from 500 in population down to 60 in Jamestown. So arriving was the next governor, Sir Thomas Gates, 1610 to 1611. He had fought Spain and so forth. He sailed the Sea Venture, and their ship was shipwrecked on the island of Bermuda for 10 months. The account inspired Shakespeare to write The Tempest. The Sea Venture passenger Stephen Hopkins, who was found guilty of mutiny and sentenced to death, but he cried and they interceded and they spared him. And Shakespeare is thought to have made his character Stephano in the Tempest play based after Stephen Hopkins. Later, Stephen Hopkins went back to England and then sailed with the Pilgrims and signed the Mayflower Compact. So the only guy to be both here in Jamestown and with the Pilgrims. Another Sea Venture passenger was John Rolfe. He discovered sweet tobacco in Bermuda and brought it and planted it, and it became the cash crop for Virginia. For some reason, they thought the Indians were healthy and they smoked peace pipes, and so smoking tobacco must make you healthy. And so it became a craze in England. Everybody wanted tobacco. And John Rolfe married Pocahontas, the daughter of Chief Powhatan, and it gave a peace to the colony. And another Sea Venture society, they pieced together the wreckage of the Sea Venture and a couple smaller boats, and they came to Jamestown right during this starving time. And so the governor, Sir Thomas Gates, says, this isn't going to work. And he decides to pack everyone on boats and go back to England and end the whole thing. But right when they were pulling out of the harbor, in sails Baron Delaware, Thomas West, and that's where you get the Delaware River and the state of Delaware. And he was the governor of the Jamestown colony. And now John Smith, he describes the early settlement in 1631, advertisements for unexperienced planters. And he said, when I first went to Virginia, I well remember we did hang an awning, which is an old sail, to 3 or 4 trees to shadow us from the sun. Our walls were rails of wood, our seats unhewn trees, till we cut planks. And this was their church. Our pulpit, a bar of wood nailed to 2 neighboring trees. In foul weather, we shifted into an old rotten tent. We had a few. This was our church till we built a homely thing like a barn. We had daily common prayer, morning and evening, every day 2 sermons, every 3 months the Holy Communion till our minister, Robert Hunt, died, but our prayers daily with an homily on Sundays. And now when Reverend Hunt died shortly thereafter, the settlers gave him a tribute. 1607, to the glory of God and in memory of the Reverend Robert Hunt, presbyter, appointed by the Church of England, minister of the colony, which established the English church and English civilization at Jamestown. His people, members of the colony, left this testimony concerning him. Reverend Robert Hunt was an honest, religious, and courageous divine. He preferred the service of God in so good a voyage to every thought of ease at home. Their tribute continued. He endured every privation, yet none ever heard him repine or complain. During his life, our factions were often healed, and our greatest extremities so comforted that they seemed easy in comparison with what we endured after his memorable death. We all received from him the Holy Communion together as a pledge of reconciliation, for we all loved him for his exceeding goodness. He planted the first Protestant church in America and laid down his life in the foundation of America. So they were churchgoers that founded Virginia. Now, I mentioned Sir Edwin Sandys, the one that the king hated. He was the opponent of divine right of kings. He supported a constitutional monarchy, the beginning of taking power away from this globalist king. And so when he was in control of the Virginia Company in 1619, Sir Edwin Sandys helped establish a representative assembly in Virginia. It's the first representative body in North American colonies and the first representative body in the Western Hemisphere, the Virginia House of Burgesses. So in this state, in this colony, we see the beginnings of taking the power of a globalist king and having it spread out to the representatives of the people, and then step by step by step, it gave birth to America. You know, this is a country based on God. And when they wrote the Constitution, they needed to ratify it in 1788. They needed 9 states. They had 8. New Hampshire was in line to be the 9th, but it was having a deadlock. And so Harvard president Samuel Langdon shows up at the New Hampshire ratifying convention, and he gives them an address titled "The Republic of the Israelites, an Example to the American States." Instead of the 12 tribes of Israel, we may substitute the 13 states of the American Union. See this application plainly. After his address, they voted. They ratified the Constitution, and it went into effect. Our U.S. Constitution went into effect after the sermon, "The Republic of the Israelites, an Example to the American States." Well, you know, I spent several years researching every single century of recorded human history. It's all kings: Nimrod, Pharaoh, Caesar, Kaiser, Sultan, Tsars, Attila the Hun, Genghis Khan, Julius Caesar. What happened in America is a model after ancient Israel. Around 1400 BC, they came out of Egypt, where pharaohs ruled everything. They came into the Promised Land, where you had King Og of Bashan and everything. And for 400 years, Israel did not have a king. It was a system that worked because every citizen was taught the law, and every citizen was personally accountable to God to follow the law. Right? You're about to steal, nobody's around, and then you think, God's watching me. He wants me to be fair. He's going to hold me accountable. Maybe I should hesitate stealing. And it creates something in your head called the conscience. If everybody in the country believes this, you can maintain complete order with no police. Yeah. So in America, when we say it's one nation under God, it's more than just a nice little acknowledgement. It's everyone walking around realizing there is a God who's watching me. He wants me to be fair, and he's going to hold me accountable in the future. Maybe I should hesitate stealing. Right? It's like everybody downloaded a behavioral app in ancient Israel. Instead of a GPS, it told them how to act. It's the law. And it worked because everybody, now God knew they would sin, and so once a year they had the Day of Atonement, Yom Kippur, and they brought the blood of the sacrifice into the Holy of Holies and sprinkled it on the mercy seat. And everyone's sins in the nation were forgiven for the past year. They started the new year off with a clean slate. And obviously, that is foreshadowing Jesus. He is our atonement, not just for the last year, but for our entire life and for all eternity. And yes. Now, what happened with ancient Israel? The priests stopped teaching the law. You said they did? Yeah, here's Eli, the high priest. His own sons are sleeping with women in the very tent where the Ark of the Covenant is. And then there's another Levite with a silver graven image in the book of Judges. Like, well, isn't that one of the commandments? You're not supposed to have graven images, and he's got one. And then another one with a Levite with a concubine. The law says the Levite's to marry a virgin of his own tribe. Here he is with a woman he's not even married to. He's not following the law. And it turns into this chaos, and the sodomites bang on the door and rape the poor girl, concubine to death. And you get grossed out, and you read this line, every man did that which was right in their own eyes. Why? Because the priests had stopped teaching what was right in the Lord's eyes. Right? And so that's when they all go to Samuel the prophet, and they say, this self-government system's not working anymore. We want to be like all the other countries. We want a king. Samuel cries, and the Lord said, they did not reject you. They rejected me. God's original plan for Israel was to not have a king, have everybody be taught the law, everybody personally accountable to God, right? And then the once a year, the Day of Atonement. Our founding fathers looked back to this period as the model of how to have a government without a King James and without a King George, right? We are experiment. So King Saul is the dividing point between America and England. In England, they look to the Bible for their authority, but they look to the anointed King Saul. Our founders looked to the Bible for their authority, but they looked to the pre-King Saul period, that 400 years where everyone was taught the law. Anyway, I'll end with that. God bless you.